welcome back to my channel and welcome to day 14 of my 2022 holiday card series. Today I'm going to be making a card using Mama Elephant's You've Got Mail, and I'm going to be coloring to match some pattern paper from the Simple Stories Baking Spirits Bright 6x8 pad. So I'm just going to tear out a sheet and tuck it under my Spectrum Noir cardstock panel, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. So I'm going to start with the bear, and I wanted him to be a polar bear. I just happen to really love polar bears, but also since this is going to be a Christmas card with a snowy scene, I just thought it would be fun to do a polar bear. So I'm using E50 and E51 to add a little bit of shading to this guy. I'm going to stick real close to the outside edges because I don't want him to end up looking like a cream colored bear. I just want him to have those cream colored shadows. So it gives him some definition, but he still looks nice and white. So I laid in the E51 first and then blended that out with the E50, and now I'm taking the colorless blender and just helping smooth that transition from the E50 into the white space. And then while I have those markers out, I'm also going to do a few of the envelopes. I am going to do a whole assortment of colors for the envelopes. I prefer to send out my cards in colored envelopes. In fact, that's all I use, but I think it's nice to have a mix of the cream color in there as well, just to kind of break up all of the colors that I'll be using. So then I want to move up to the bunny, and I'm going to keep the E51, but I want to darken him up to make him more distinct. So I'm going to add in the E53 and the E55. So I'm using that E55 first and laying in my shadows for him. I'm going to do them on the left hand side just like I did with my bear. Since all of these critters are facing toward the right, I want to keep the highlight on their faces and put the shadows down the back. I also put some under his arm and like between his little legs where they would be casting a shadow. And I'm going to bring that lightest shade, the E51, down over his face to kind of draw in some little patches. I want to leave the lower part of his face white, also his belly and his little paw and both of his feet and his tail, and then I'll bring in the E50 to kind of bridge the gap for that and just add a little shading to his feet and his tail. So once I'm done with that, I'm going to move up to the squirrel, and I'm going to make him a red squirrel. So those are my favorite animal. And I got so lucky in this scene. Two of my favorite animals are red squirrels and polar bears, and they're both in this scene. So that's really cool. If I could have an elephant, I'd be all set because that's my third favorite. But I also really do love bunnies. So here we go. I'm going to use E11, E15, E17, and E18 for the red squirrel, just using the darkest three shades for the majority of his body. So I started with the E18, which is a nice dark shade, gave him some shadows in the curve of his tail and down his back as well. And then I blended that out with the E17. Then I'm going to come in with the E15 and finish up his face and his little arms, his belly, and the rest of his tail as well. And then that area around his eye, I'm going to add like a little bit of a darker patch there using a tiny touch of that E15 and then filling the rest in with the E11. And I realized I'd forgotten to color the bunny's other ear, so I just pulled the E55 back out for that. So for the little mouse, I'm going to do my current favorite combo for mice, which is W00 combined with E70 and E71. Started with the E71, and then I'm blending out with the E70. And then I'll use the W00 to transition from that into the rest of the body. I really like how that combo works together. And then for the bird, I decided to do a bluebird just to kind of break up some of the neutrals and start pulling in some color from the pattern paper. There's like a really dark navy blue snowflake and polka dot in that pattern paper. So I went with B93, B95, and B97. And I'm going to color him all in except for a little bit on his belly. And for that, I will use R11 and R20 to give him a little red breast like a bluebird. I'm also going to give him and the rest of the critters some rosy cheeks, starting with that R20. And I'll do the bunny and the bear and the mouse's ears as well. And then I'll blend that out with the R11. I'm not going to bother blending out the red squirrel because you wouldn't have seen it. I did need to bring in the R000 for the lighter colored critters to help blend that out. And I'll also do a few of the envelopes in the bag and in the critters' hands. So there's no pink in the pattern paper that I'm actually using for my color palette, but I'm going to combine this sheet that I pulled out with another piece of pattern paper that does have pink on it. So I wanted to incorporate pink into the coloring to tie all of those patterns in. So then I'm going to move on to the mailbox, and I decided to just go with like a dark black mailbox, which is what I have. So I'm going to use T3, T5, and T7. Starting at the bottom edge, the light would be hitting at the top there. So I'm going to keep the shadows down at the bottom on both the side and the door using that T7. And then I'm going to use the T5 to pull that color up. I'm using that flicking motion so I get those little feathered ends, which is going to help transition into the next shade. So once I have the T5 laid in, I'm going to bring in the T3, and I ended up deciding that I was going to add in a fourth shade just right at the very, very top for an extra bit of highlight. So I just left a little bit of white space there, and then I'm going to use the T1 for that. So I'll just use that to fill everything in. And then I am going to do a second layer of the mailbox off screen just to make sure it's really smooth so that, you know, it looks like a shiny metal object. I also use the T7 to just outline the lip of the front door. And then I'm going to do the pole that the mailbox is standing on by just darkening up this combo. So I kept the T5 and the T7 and added in the T9. So I think you could do this in many different colors, but I just decided to make it to kind of match with the mailbox. But yeah, I think you could do it in so many different tones. You could do it as just like a plain wood, or you could have it be painted, or whatever you want. You could have it, you know, made out of wrought iron, which is kind of the look that I'm going for, although, you know, it could be whatever you want it to be. So I did leave the little rings so that I could color those in a contrasting color, but I'll get to that later on. I'm going to change up to a red combo next to pull in the reds from that pattern paper. And I'm starting with the lighter red. There's actually two reds in that pattern paper. One is darker and then one is a bit brighter. So I'm doing the brighter combo using R22, R24, and R29. And I'm going to do the polar bear's scarf. So I just put my shading in the same places that I did on his body so it would match, and where that fabric is gathered at the back of his neck. And then I'm also going to do the metal flag that, you know, you put up to let your mailman know that there is mail ready to be taken out to be processed and delivered. So I have that, and then I'm also going to do a few more of these envelopes. And I'm just picking and choosing different ones so that they're not right next to each other, so that those colors will be spread out in little pops throughout the card. So I mainly use the darkest two shades on the lower part of the envelope, and then added the medium shade for the shadow on the flap, and then blended out with the lightest. just to kind of give it a different look so it's not all one note. And then, like I said, there is a darker red in that pattern paper. So for that combo, I'm going to use R29, R39, and R59. And that will just give me, another tie-in to those patterns and just make your card look really intentional because you have those colors repeated throughout, not only the coloring, but also in the pattern paper. So next up, I'm going to do some kind of dusty teals, which you can see in that pattern paper as well. And for that, I'm using BG72, BG75, and BG78. And again, I'm just going to pick and choose different envelopes to do. So I did one in the bag and then one that is going in the red squirrel's little paw. And I'm going to do one sticking out of the mailbox as well, that last one there. So there's only a few envelopes left, and I wanted to bring in another color in that pattern paper. It's green. The green in the pattern paper is actually a bit duller than the green combo that I ended up going with. I decided to just brighten it up a bit because I didn't want the scene to look too dark and moody and kind of like depressing. So I decided to just make it more of a traditional green. So I went with G12, G14, and G16 and did the last few envelopes there. And then for the bag, I was going back and forth about what combo to do, but I decided that I wanted to tie that Bluebird in somewhere else, that color. So I'm going back to the shades that I used with the exception of going slightly lighter. I believe I had the B97 in the Bluebird and I didn't use the B91. So I'm just going slightly lighter, so it's in the same tone, but not exactly the same since this one isn't a living creature. I just wanted to kind of differentiate that a bit. So I used the B95 to add in the shadows wherever the fabric was kind of slouched and gathered, or where the mailbox stand was in front, or the envelopes. So any of that would be casting a shadow. I'm going to keep the highlight right in the center there. So I'm just bringing that color in from the outside edges toward that center using the B93 for the midtone and then the B91 for the highlight. So once I have that completely colored, I just have those little rings on the stand. I decided to pull in a color that's not in the pattern paper. It's Y21 and Y26, just adding a little bit of a gold tone again to warm things up, and I think it ties in nicely with the brown of the bunny. So I just used those two shades and then added a bit more of the Y26 to darken up the shadows, and then I grabbed my black Sakura Jelly Roll pen and got that started. And then went over the eyes of my critters to make them nice and bright and shiny. It also gives them just a little bit of a raised texture, which is nice. And then I'm going to trim all of these images out with their matching dies. So then I'm going to go back to my Simple Stories Baking Spirits Bright 6x8 pad and choose the pink and red stripe. Like I said, I'm going to combine these two prints together, and the first thing I'm going to do is adhere this pink and red stripe to a piece of plain white cardstock just to give it a bit more stability, make it a little bit thicker so that I can die cut out of it. So then I'm going to take the B2B arches. I think B2B stands for Back to Basics, correct me if I'm wrong. And I'm just going to test and see which one of these I want to use to die cut a little window out of my scene. So I decided to go with this one here. I'm just going to tape it into place using some Post-it tape and then run that through my die cutting machine. And then I'm going to be left with the inner part, which I can save and use on another card. But for today, I just want to use the outer frame. Then I took the Hello Bluebird Hill and Dale dies and die cut 2 snowdrifts out of some more plain white cardstock. I'll pop one of those in my Misty so I can stamp my sentiment, and I'm going to use VersaFine Onyx Black ink for that, just because it's such a nice, dark, strong black ink, and I wanted to make sure that sentiment really stood out. So I'm going to stamp that down a couple of times, and then I will pop that out so that I can work on my card for the inside. The card base I made out of MFT snow cone cardstock, and I'm going to stamp in Lawn Fawn Rainforest ink, which kind of ties in with those BG70 shades that I used on some of those envelopes. I am going to stamp that down a few times. I'm doing a bunny from this set that I used, the You've Got Mail, and another sentiment that says Holiday Hugs Enclosed. And then I'm going to start to assemble my cards. So I'm going to start with the snowflake print that I used to pull my color palette from. That's actually going to become my background. I just trimmed that down to be slightly smaller than the card front, and then I'm going to layer these 2 snowdrifts over top. So I have a taller one that's going to go in back, and then a shorter one that's going to go in front. And I need to make sure that you can see the sentiment and that it's positioned correctly when I pop that frame on. So I'm just going to adjust that while that glue is still wet. I did add some Scotch 3M foam tape to the back of that frame, and I made sure to use enough so it was really well supported since it is kind of thin. So I didn't want it to get bent as it's going through the mail or buckled in any way. One part of my foam tape on the back was a little bit too tall, so it was bumped up, so I just had to tear a tiny corner of that off. And then once I'm ready, I'm going to line that up with the front of the card, make sure it's nice and straight before I press that down into place. And then I can bring in my images. I've also added some foam tape to the backs of those. So I'm just going to peel off any release papers there, and again adjust if I had any that were too long so that the foam tape was kind of overlapping each other, because that kind of gives you extra bumps that I don't want. And I'm going to add that to the card on the right hand side, the mailbox there. And I'm going to just set it gently into place. I want it to overlap the outside of the frame a bit, so I didn't put any foam tape behind the green envelope over there on the right hand side, so it would lay flat on top of the frame. And then the same with like the red squirrel's tail that is going on the left. And I am going to add the little mouse in between these, so I've popped him up with foam tape as well. So I'm just going to add him kind of right before that sentiment. So cute. So next I wanted to add a little bit of sparkle using some sequins. I'm still using this pack from Lucy's Little Things, which unfortunately is discontinued. I think it's probably a year or 2 old at least. But I have found other sequin packs that are similar, so I'll do my best to link what I can find down below in the description bar if you'd like something similar. This one just has a variety of white and kind of shiny sequins, and then a few snowflakes thrown in there. And I just use my Twiddler's Nook tray for that so that I can just pour everything right back into the bag when I'm done. And then I wanted to add a bit of glitter, so I'm using my favorite Stardust Stickles to add a little dot to the inside of each of the sequins, just to fill in that hole and give an extra little shot of sparkle on the scene. So I'm just going to finish that up, and then I wanted to add it to a few of the images as well. So I ended up just going with all of the red things, except for the flag on the mailbox, and then I also did the pink envelope that the mouse was holding. So I did the polar bear scarf, and I think all of the red envelopes, and then just the one pink envelope. I just wanted little pops here and there without making the card look too overwhelming or too overdone, since I already had a lot of sequins on there. I just didn't want to go too crazy. So I'm just fixing any glitter that might have gone over the black lines. I wanted to make sure that you could still see all of that, and then I'm going to lift that up to the camera so you can see all of the detail and catch a look at that sparkle and shine, and give you another peek at the inside. I really hope you guys enjoyed this one. I think these images are just so adorable, and I had so much fun creating it for you. If you did like it, please be sure to hit that thumbs up button and subscribe. Ring that notification bell so you never miss a video. I post new ones every Monday and Friday. If you're interested in any of these products, I'll have everything listed and linked for you in the description bar below. And if you'd like to keep watching, here is day 14 of the previous 2 years of holiday card series. You can click on either one to check them out. Thank you so much for watching and spending your time with me today. I hope you had a good one, and I'll see you soon in another video.